Long before anyone with a camera showed up, it was just a man, a boat, and a bird that refused to forget. The fisherman's days had a shape that barely changed. Dark at the window, thermos on the table, boots by the door that never really dried. The sea deciding, with its own moods, whether the nets came back heavy or light. On most mornings, the only footprints on the gray sand were his and the stray dog that sometimes followed him halfway and then lost interest. The penguin arrived on a day that already felt wrong. The water had a dull metallic shine, the kind it got after a storm when currents brought in things nobody wanted. There was a faint chemical smell riding under the usual salt and fish. Even the gulls sounded hoarse. He noticed the shape on the beach because it was the only thing not moving. At first, he thought it was a torn black sack or a dead cormorant. It lay in the surf line, where waves reached and retreated with slow, indifferent hands. Each time the water pulled back, the shape rolled a little, revealed more white, then slumped again. When he got closer, he saw feet. Not webbed like a duck's, but narrower, tougher, ending in claws that looked built for gripping rock. A black head with a white stripe. Eyes closed, glued lashes glistening with oil and seawater. The penguin was so covered in the sticky black sheen that its feathers looked painted. Only along the edge of one wing did he see a patch of clean white where the muck had not yet reached. It was still breathing. The fisherman could feel the tiny effort of it when he slid his hands under the bird's body, heavier than it looked, dense with water and cold. The smell of oil came up stronger now, mixed with the sharp, bitter scent of whatever fuel had spilled somewhere out past the horizon. There were rules about wild animals. He knew some of them in the same distant way he knew about taxes and city meetings. There were people in bigger towns who were supposed to deal with this. But the bigger town was several hours away, and the bird in his hands had minutes, not paperwork, to spare. He carried it home. His house was small and practical, built one patch at a time as money and weather allowed. The kitchen was the warmest place, the one room where the chill from the ocean did not creep under doors quite as fast. He lined an old plastic crate with rags, set the bird in it, and stared at the ruin of the feathers. Cleaning oil from a living thing was not like rinsing nets. He had seen news footage once on the small television that only worked when the weather cooperated, of people in white suits washing birds in lines. They moved so quickly and precisely, hands trained by repetition. Here, there was only him, a sink, a bottle of dish soap, and a creature that woke up halfway through the first attempt and began to fight in small, panicked bursts. They both ended the day exhausted. The fisherman learned quickly that the water had to be warm, but not hot, that scrubbing too hard broke feathers instead of saving them, that the penguin's flippers were stronger than they looked, even when the bird could barely stand. The penguin learned that the hands that hurt also fed. Small pieces of fish, offered on a plate first, and then, when it refused to move, held close enough for its beak to find. He did not give it a name out loud at first. Names were for the dog, for the boat, for the storms everyone still used old saints to describe. Birds that arrived from the open sea usually left again or did not. Naming them felt like asking for trouble. Still, after the worst of the oil came off, and white began to appear again in patches, the word that had formed in his head refused to leave. It came when the bird managed, on the third day, to stand upright for a few seconds, wings slightly spread for balance, looking affronted by gravity itself. It came when he found it at night, awake and watching the door as if waiting for someone who was late. He started to use the word silently, like a thought worn smooth. The penguin's recovery was not a clean upward line. Some days it ate eagerly, stabbing each piece of fish with such precision that he pulled his fingers back on instinct. Other days it barely moved, eyes dull, feathers hanging awkwardly as if they no longer fit right. He learned to recognize the slight flaring of its nostrils that meant stress, the particular stiff way it held its body when pain pulled against its skin. He set a shallow tub in the yard and filled it with water warmed in pots. The first time he lowered the penguin into it, it thrashed so violently that water soaked his trousers and flew up the walls. Then instinct threaded through panic. The bird floated. Its body understood something its nerves had forgotten. It dipped its head, shook droplets onto the grass, preened clumsily where feathers were still out of order. Slowly, the oil smell faded. The sharp, clean scent of wet feathers returned. The fisherman's neighbors saw the bird on their way past his gate and gave him the kind of look people reserved for those who had invited trouble into their own houses. Taking in a stray dog was one thing. Bringing a wild bird into the kitchen was another. He shrugged and joked that the penguin ate less than some human guests. Under the easy surface, a quieter bond was forming. The penguin began to follow him with its eyes wherever he went in the house. When he stepped into the yard, it shuffled to the edge of the crate or tub, craning to keep him in sight. If he stood still near the tub while it floated, it drifted closer until the side of its body brushed his leg. One morning, weeks after he had carried it off the sand, he woke to a strange silence. The crate was empty. For a moment, a ridiculous fear flashed through his mind that the bird had climbed into his bed or into the refrigerator or some other obviously impossible place. Then he heard a sound from outside, a sharp slap and splash, followed by the hollow, rhythmic thump of something hitting the side of the barrel where he kept bait. The penguin had climbed clumsily out the back door, left a wet trail of prints, and was now standing in a puddle beside the barrel, pecking at its own reflection in a metal lid. It turned when it heard him. Its eyes were bright, beak slightly open. The body that had once slumped in his crate now held itself with the taut, ready balance of a creature built for water and long journeys. He knew what that meant. Keeping a wild animal that could live was another kind of harm. However much the bird had attached itself to the routine of tub, crate, and kitchen, the horizon had other plans built into its muscles. He carried the crate down to the beach again that afternoon, the same path in reverse. The penguin sat inside, feathers clean and dense, head moving restlessly as if counting each step. On the sand, the wind was rough and playful, shoving foam along the shore. The water was clearer now, the strange metallic sheen gone, though he knew there were places out there where what had nearly killed the bird still clung to rocks and drifted in invisible streaks. He set the crate down in the wet sand, door facing the surf, and opened it. For a long moment, nothing happened. The penguin stayed where it was, body a compressed shape of indecision. Then it waddled forward, each step slow but steady. When the first wave reached its feet, it hesitated again, then pushed through, belly low, wings out for balance. The second wave lifted it. In water, it became something else entirely. The clumsy, awkward walker of kitchens and yards stretched into a perfect line of motion. Wings turned to flippers, beating with quick economical power just under the surface. It dove once, twice, vanishing in a blur of white and black, then reappeared farther out, shaking its head, sending drops flying. He watched until his eyes stung. The bird turned once in the surf, as if checking some last point of reference, then aimed itself toward the open water and went. For days afterward, he kept thinking he saw its shape in every wave. Habit did not stop just because the bird had left. There were still nets to mend, bait to cut, weather to curse. He spoke about the penguin only when asked and shrugged off the concern some people expressed about the effort he had put in. He had done what anyone should, he said. The sea had broken it. Someone had to at least try to repair the damage. Autumn came. The town shifted into its quieter season. Tourists thinned out. Winds picked up. The television, when it worked, spoke about elections and storms in other countries, and a football team that refused to win. On a gray morning several months later, he walked down to his boat with a familiar heaviness in his joints and the half-awake concentration of someone already thinking ahead to the work of the day. Something moved by the bow. At first, he thought it was the stray dog again, nose in the bilge. But the shape was wrong, shorter, rounder, black and white. The penguin stood on the damp planks of the shoreside slipway, chest out, feet braced, as if it had been waiting for him long enough to get annoyed. Its feathers were sleek and immaculate now, no trace of oil. The white on its belly shone even under the low sky. Its head cocked to one side, taking him in with one bright eye, then the other. It made a low, rasping sound in its throat, halfway between a bark and a cough. People would later call what it did recognition, with various adjectives attached: intelligent, emotional, improbable. In that moment, it was simply a bird walking straight toward him, ignoring every other shape on the beach. It crossed the wet sand with the same odd combination of dignity and clumsiness he remembered from the yard, and stopped close enough that he could feel its breath. Without thinking, he reached out. The bird did not flinch. His hand met a line of warm, dense feathers. It smelled of salt and fish and the deep, cold places he only skimmed with his nets. He laughed once, involuntarily, the sound blurred at the edges by surprise. From that day, the pattern changed. The penguin did not stay all year. It had its own long routes written into the map of the sea, currents and feeding grounds that had nothing to do with a single man and his small boat. But at certain times, after long stretches of absence, the bird would appear again, as suddenly as if someone had set it down overnight beside the bow. Sometimes he found it waiting on the beach in the morning, standing where the wet sand darkened into the dry. Sometimes, when he returned from a day on the water, it would climb unsteadily onto the low stern, using beak and claws, and settle there like a passenger who had decided the trip wasn't over yet. He never tried to keep it from leaving. If it followed him home, he let it waddle around the yard, splash in the tub, steal small pieces of fish if he turned his back. If it stayed near the boat, he made sure no one chased it away. When it vanished again, he let it go. The first few years, the secret stayed mostly on the sand. Neighbors knew, of course. It was hard to pretend you didn't see a penguin following a man down the lane or waiting on his doorstep. Children whispered and pointed. Some of the older fishers shook their heads and muttered about good omens or bad, depending on how their last catch had gone. Nobody outside the town paid attention. The fisherman did not take pictures. His phone was old and lived in a drawer most days. He did not post online or chase reporters. What he had with the bird felt too fragile for that. He learned its habits instead. It preferred certain spots on the rocks where it could dry its feathers and watch the horizon. It was curious about buckets and shoes and the reflective skins of fish. When he hosed down the deck, it hopped and grumbled, offended by cold spray, but refused to move. Once, during a heavy rain that kept all boats on land, he found it pressed against his front door, soaked and indignant. He let it in without thinking, and for the rest of the storm, it explored the house with the serious focus of an inspector. He aged alongside these visits. His hair thinned and went saltier. His hands ached more after hauling nets. The penguin, by contrast, seemed to stay at a certain absolute of adult strength and sleekness, its yearly molt sharpening rather than softening its outline. He wondered sometimes how long this could last. He did not know how long penguins lived in the wild, only that most did not get the chance to die of age. The sea was full of teeth and hunger and sudden storms. Oil spills were only one of many sharp edges waiting out there. For a long time, the only record of their meetings lived in the memories of the people who walked the same beach. Then one summer, a tourist with a newer phone and a better signal arrived. She stayed at the small guest house near the harbor, saw the penguin waiting by the man's boat one bright morning, and did what almost anyone from elsewhere would do: lifted her phone and captured it. The video was short. It showed the fisherman coming down the sand with his usual unhurried gait, carrying a tackle box in one hand and rubbing sleep from his eyes with the other. It showed the penguin stand up straighter at the sight of him, shuffle forward, and slap its feet on the wet boards. It showed the moment when the bird reached him, pushed its body against his boot, and looked up. He reached down, as he always did now, and ran his hand over its back in one quick, practiced stroke. The tourist posted the clip that evening with a caption about a penguin best friend. By morning, the numbers under it had begun to climb in a way nothing in the fisherman's life ever had. He heard about it third hand. The shopkeeper's niece, who spent more time looking at her phone than the cash drawer, ran up to him, waving the screen. She showed him his own hands, his own boots, his own yard, framed in a world of hearts and comments and words in languages he did not speak. He squinted, made a face, and went back to coiling rope. The world did not go back to normal. Within a week, journalists started calling the guest house, then the harbor office, then any number they would find that looked like it might lead to someone who knew where a man and a penguin shared a beach. Cars with unfamiliar plates began to appear in the lot above the harbor. People with bigger cameras than the one in the tourist's phone walked down the same path he did, but slower, stopping to frame shots of boats, rocks, anything that might hint at something viral. They asked questions he did not like. Did he train the penguin? Did he feed it every day or only sometimes? Did he ever think about taking it to a zoo or an aquarium for its own safety? Would he mind if they filmed him, if they put him on television, if they used his name in a headline? He did not have a media plan. He had nets and weather and the weight of his own habits. He gave as little as he could. Yes, The bird came back. No, he did not know why. Yes, he fed it when it was there. No, he did not keep it from leaving. It was not a pet. It was not a miracle. It was just a bird that had decided not to forget him. The attention did not stop just because he wanted it to. A conservation group reached out next, not with cameras, but with a different kind of urgency. They had seen the videos. They recognized the species. They knew roughly which currents might bring such a bird to this particular stretch of coast each year. They wanted to tag it. Satellite tags were not small things, but they had grown lighter and less clumsy over the years. Attached correctly, they rode on the bird's back like an extra feathered hump, sending up brief whispers to satellites whenever the penguin surfaced to breathe. The fisherman hesitated. The penguin had already survived one human disaster and one human rescue. It had paid for both with its feathers and its trust. Strapping technology to its back felt like another intrusion. At the same time, the thought of knowing where it went when it left, of seeing its invisible roots declared in lines and points on a screen, pulled at him. In the end, he agreed on one condition: the tag would not stay forever. They fitted it on a cool morning, under the eye of someone who had done this for many birds before. The penguin tolerated the handling with a kind of grumpy dignity, snapping its beak at ankles when it could reach them, but not struggling with the panic of that first oil bath years ago. When it returned to the sea next, it did so with a small piece of human curiosity riding its back. The map that grew on laptop screens in far offices over the next months astonished more people than the original video had. The penguin did not just swim in circles near the fisherman's town and wait for fish. It traveled hundreds, then thousands of kilometers, tracing loops and lines along currents that oceanographers knew well and most other people never thought about. It moved past industrial ports and empty stretches of coast. It spent days in rich feeding grounds far offshore, then returned along a path that looked almost careless and was anything but. Each year, the pattern shifted slightly, as if the sea wrote new instructions. Each year, one point remained fixed, a cluster of signals near the same small bay, always around the same time, always over a handful of days when, on the beach, a man in old boots would see a familiar shape on the sand again. The story of the penguin and the fisherman went around the world in waves. Documentaries used drone shots of the bay and slow, sentimental music. News segments cut between the man, the bird, and experts talking about bonds and animal intelligence and the resilience of life. Children in cities that never saw the ocean drew uneven penguins and boats for school after watching it in class. Some people rolled their eyes at the sentiment. They said it was just a penguin and a man, nothing mystical. Others built whole fantasies around it, talking as if the bird loved him the way a dog did. The fisherman kept his own understanding narrower and, in some ways, deeper. For him, the story was held in smaller details, the way the penguin's feathers felt under his hand, denser than any other bird he had touched. The sound of its feet on the boat's deck, the way it stood at the water's edge on the day it returned, shaking off drops as if deciding whether to climb into the crate again after all. He also noticed what the cameras did not. He saw the day the penguin stayed back, away from the larger clusters of visitors, eyes flicking from one unfamiliar person to another, body tense. He saw the slight hesitation before it climbed onto the stern when tripods crowded the docks. He saw how it relaxed when the beach was empty, how its movements turned smoother and less jerky when the only human nearby was the one it knew. Over time, a compromise developed. The conservation workers helped set up simple rules. A distance people were asked to keep, hours when the harbor path was closed, a small area of rocks that were left free of tripods and flashes. Signs went up in multiple languages, explaining that the penguin was not a performer and that it needed space to remain what it was. Some obeyed, some did not. Humans were as varied in instinct as any other species. The fisherman found himself, reluctantly, a kind of guard as well as host. He learned to say no in firm tones to people who wanted to get closer. He learned to stand in the way without making a scene. Occasionally, he picked up a stone and tossed it, not at anyone, but in a line in the sand that meant enough. The penguin kept coming. Years slid one into the next. The tag eventually wore out and was removed, its battery done, its job finished. The map of the bird's travels lived on in reports, in presentations at conferences, in quiet conversations between people who had devoted their lives to creatures that never heard their names. The fisherman's knees grew worse. Climbing in and out of the boat took longer. On some mornings, he sat with his back against the harbor wall longer than he once would have, watching waves and listening to his own breath, and wondering how many more seasons the sea would lease him. One year, when the time came and the penguin did not appear, a thin strand of dread wound through the bay. The beach felt wider. The tourists who had come hoping for a glimpse seemed to speak more quietly, as if in a church. Conversations in the small cafe up the hill circled back, again and again, to timing and currents and storms. He went down to the water every morning anyway. He checked the same spots on the rocks, the same patch of wet sand where webbed feet had so often left their prints. He told himself, and anyone who asked, that wild lives were not calendars, that the penguin might have found richer waters or a different route, or just decided not to bother with him anymore. On the 12th day, before dawn, he heard a sound that did not belong to the waves or the gulls. A low, rough call, a slap of feet on wet wood. He stepped out of the shadow of the boathouse and saw it standing by the bow, water tracking off its feathers in bright, clean lines, head held high as if it had never been gone at all. Later, someone would say it was like watching a promise kept. The fisherman thought of it more simply. A bird had survived another year of everything the sea threw at it, and for reasons only it knew, it had spent some of its hard-won time back on this particular shore. The story that the rest of the world loved, about friendship, loyalty, miracles, lived on screens and in headlines. The story that mattered to him lived in very small motions, a hand reaching down, a beak tilting up, a shared understanding that required no words. He knew it would end one day. Nothing in his world lasted forever. Boats rotted. Nets tore. People he had known since childhood faded and left empty chairs in bars and on doorsteps. Penguins, even those that crossed whole oceans, were not exceptions to the basic math of life. But until that day came, the pattern held. Each year, somewhere out in the moving dark of the currents, a bird with a faint memory of a crate, warm water, and human hands made its own choices. Each year, for reasons that might be some mysterious bond or might be nothing more than a combination of scent, landmarks, and instinct, those choices led it back to the same stretch of sand and the same man who had once picked it up off the beach when it could not even stand. Their secret, such as it had been, no longer belonged only to them. It had flown far beyond the town, beyond the bay, into classrooms and living rooms and phones around the world. People used it to argue about kindness and conservation and the intelligence of animals. They pasted their own hopes onto it, like sticky notes on a door. On some evenings, when the cameras had gone and the light turned the water silver, the fisherman would sit on the low wall, the penguin at his feet preening after a day of swimming beside the boat. In those moments, the noise of the wider world fell away. There was only the soft rasp of beak on feathers, the slow slap of small waves against the hull, and the simple, stubborn fact that a wild animal, free to go anywhere the sea allowed, had come back again to the same rough hands and the same worn boots. Whatever anyone chose to call it from afar, that was enough for him.